Tyler had always been different. While the other boys at school played sports or talked about cars, he spent his free time sketching dresses and experimenting with fabrics he found in thrift stores. His room was a kaleidoscope of color, filled with bolts of fabric, spools of thread, and the glow of his sewing machine. It was his sanctuary, the one place where he felt free to be himself. But freedom came with a cost. At home, his father Robert's disapproving gaze seemed to follow him everywhere. A retired military officer, Robert had always valued discipline and conformity. Tyler's creative pursuits clashed with everything Robert believed in. The tension between them simmered quietly for years, but it was always there, an invisible wall that separated father and son. On the evening of Tyler's 18th birthday, the tension reached its breaking point. The family had gathered around the dining table, the air thick with unspoken words. Tyler's mother, Anne, had baked his favorite cake, a rich chocolate layered with strawberry filling, but Tyler hardly touched it. His palms were clammy, his heart racing. He had spent weeks rehearsing this moment in front of the mirror, but now that it was here, the words seemed stuck in his throat. "Mom, Dad," Tyler began, his voice shaking slightly. "There's something I need to tell you." Anne's kind smile faltered as she glanced at Robert, whose expression had already hardened. I'm gay." The silence that followed was deafening. Tyler's heart pounded as he searched his parents' faces for a sign of acceptance, but what he found instead was disbelief. Robert was the first to speak. "What did you just say?" His tone was cold, almost mechanical. "I said I'm gay, Dad," Tyler repeated, his voice steadying. "I've known for a long time, and I thought it was time you knew too." And reached out to place a hand on Robert's arm, but he pulled away sharply. "This is a joke, right? You're doing this to get a reaction out of me." "Well, congratulations, Tyler. You got it." "It's not a joke," Tyler said firmly, feeling a spark of courage ignite within him. "This is who I am." Robert stood abruptly, the chair screeching against the hardwood floor. "Not under my roof," he declared, his voice rising. "You think you can just come here and spit in my face with this nonsense? I raised a son, not—" "Robert, please!" Anne interjected, tears streaming down her face. "No," Robert snapped. "If he wants to live this way, he can do it somewhere else. Pack your things, Tyler. You're done here." Tyler felt the air leave his lungs as if he'd been punched. He looked at Anne, silently pleading for her to stand up for him, but she remained frozen, her face a mask of helplessness. Without another word, Tyler turned and walked up to his room. He packed a small duffel bag with a few clothes, his sketchbook, and the last dress he had been working on. The fabric shimmered under the soft glow of his desk lamp, a vibrant blue that reminded him of a clear summer sky. When he descended the stairs, Robert was waiting by the door, arms crossed. "You made your choice," he said flatly. Tyler looked at his father one last time, searching for any sign of regret or love. There was none. With a deep breath, he stepped out into the cool night air, the door slamming shut behind him. The weight of rejection settled heavily on his shoulders as he walked aimlessly down the street. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he couldn't go back. Tears blurred his vision, but he wiped them away quickly. He wouldn't let himself break, not yet. In the distance, the city lights shimmered like a beacon of hope. Tyler clutched his bag tighter and walked toward them, determined to find a place where he could finally belong. The city was colder than Tyler had imagined. He spent his first few nights sleeping on park benches, clutching his bag tightly as the sounds of sirens and distant conversations echoed in the darkness. The world outside his suburban bubble was harsh and unforgiving. But despite the cold, hunger, and fear, Tyler refused to return home. He couldn't. On the fourth night, exhaustion took over. Tyler stumbled into a small alley near a coffee shop and sat down against the brick wall. His head rested on his knees as his body shivered uncontrollably. Just as he felt himself drifting into uneasy sleep, a soft voice interrupted the silence. "Hey, are you okay?" Tyler looked up to see a man in his late 20s with kind eyes and a warm smile. His name was Jamie, and he worked at the community center across the street. Jamie handed Tyler a hot cup of coffee and sat down beside him. "You look like you've been through a lot," Jamie said gently. "Why don't you come with me? We've got a place where you can rest and get warm." Tyler hesitated. Trust didn't come easily anymore, but something about Jamie felt safe. Nodding reluctantly, he followed him to the community center. Inside, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the cold streets. The space was filled with vibrant colors, laughter, and a sense of belonging Tyler hadn't felt in years. Jamie introduced him to others at the center, people from all walks of life who had found refuge there. "Take your time," Jamie said, showing him to a small room with a bed and a desk. "You don't have to explain anything unless you want to. Just know you're not alone anymore." For the first time in days, Tyler felt a sliver of hope. He took a long shower, letting the warmth wash away the grime and tears, then collapsed onto the bed. Over the next few weeks, Tyler settled into life at the center. He helped out in small ways, organizing supplies and cleaning up after meals. But his true solace came from the art studio in the back of the building. The first time Jamie saw Tyler sketching designs on an old notepad, his eyes lit up. "You've got talent," Jamie said, flipping through the pages. "Have you ever thought about pursuing this?" Tyler laughed bitterly. "I thought about it, but dreams don't pay the bills." Jamie placed a hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes, they do. You just need someone to believe in you." One day, Jamie handed Tyler a flyer for a local design competition. The grand prize was a scholarship to a prestigious fashion school. "You should enter," Jamie urged. "I can't afford the materials," Tyler replied, though the spark of interest in his eyes betrayed him. Jamie smiled knowingly. "Leave that to me." With Jamie's help, Tyler gathered the fabric, thread, and tools he needed. He poured every ounce of his creativity and emotion into his designs, staying up late into the night to bring them to life. His final piece, a flowing dress in shades of blue and gold, was a tribute to the duality of hope and struggle. The day of the competition arrived, and Tyler was a bundle of nerves. As he presented his designs to the judges, he noticed the audience whispering and nodding in admiration. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen. Although Tyler didn't win the competition, he earned something just as valuable, the attention of a local boutique owner named Clara, who offered him an internship at her shop. "You've got an eye for detail," Clara said, examining his sketches. "I think you could go far in this business." Tyler's internship at Clara's boutique was the first step toward rebuilding his life. He spent his days learning about the intricacies of fashion design and his nights refining his craft. Slowly, he began to believe in his own potential. But beneath his growing confidence, a small part of him still carried the weight of his father's rejection. Every stitch, every sketch was a reminder of the boy who had been told he wasn't enough. "I'll prove him wrong," Tyler thought one night as he sketched under the dim light of his desk lamp. "I'll prove them all wrong." By the end of the chapter, Tyler's transformation was well underway. He had found a place where he belonged and people who believed in him. Though his journey was far from over, he now had the tools to fight for his dreams. And for the first time, those dreams felt within reach. Tyler's internship at Clara's boutique quickly became the foundation for his growing confidence. The shop was a small but bustling place in the heart of the city, frequented by a mix of stylish locals and tourists seeking unique designs. Tyler worked tirelessly, absorbing every lesson Clara offered, from fabric selection to customer relations. "You're not just designing clothes," Clara often reminded him. "You're telling stories. Make sure your work speaks for itself." Tyler took her words to heart. By day, he helped customers and managed the boutique, but by night, he transformed into a creator. He stayed up late, hunched over his desk in the tiny room at the community center, perfecting every line and detail in his sketches. One day, Clara approached Tyler with a proposition. "I've been invited to showcase some designs at the annual Fashion Collective Gala," she said. "I want you to create a piece for the collection." Tyler froze. "Me? But..." "No buts," Clara interrupted. "You're ready. I've seen your work, Tyler. The world deserves to see it too." The weight of her trust was both terrifying and exhilarating. Tyler spent weeks crafting his design, pouring his emotions into every seam. The final piece, a sleek, modern suit with bold geometric patterns, was unlike anything he'd done before. It was a statement, not just of his talent but of his identity. The night of the gala arrived, and Tyler felt like a fish out of water. The venue was a dazzling display of wealth and creativity, filled with the city's most influential designers, critics, and buyers. Clara guided him through the crowd, introducing him as her protégé. When his piece walked the runway, Tyler's heart pounded. The applause that followed was like a balm to his soul, healing wounds he hadn't realized were still open. A few buyers even expressed interest in his work, asking if he had more pieces to showcase. The success of the gala marked a turning point for Tyler. Orders began trickling in, and Clara gave him more creative freedom at the boutique. Encouraged by this momentum, Tyler decided to take a leap of faith and launch his own brand. He started small, creating a line of limited edition pieces inspired by his journey, each one a reflection of his struggles and triumphs. His designs resonated with a diverse audience, many of whom saw their own stories reflected in his work. The brand grew rapidly, fueled by word of mouth and social media. Tyler's name became synonymous with bold, innovative designs that celebrated individuality and self-expression. Soon, he was receiving invitations to collaborate with major brands and showcase his collections at international fashion weeks. But success came with its own set of challenges. Tyler's schedule became a whirlwind of meetings, fittings, and events. The pressure to maintain his momentum was relentless, and the weight of his father's rejection still lingered in the back of his mind. One evening, as Tyler sat alone in his spacious new apartment, scrolling through old photos on his phone, he came across a picture of himself as a child, standing proudly beside his father in their backyard. They were both smiling, unaware of the pain the future would bring. Tyler sighed, setting the phone down. He had accomplished so much, yet the void left by Robert's absence remained. Determined to move forward, Tyler decided to channel his emotions into something positive. He began designing a special collection called Roots, inspired by his childhood memories. Each piece was a tribute to the boy he once was and the family he had left behind. When the collection debuted, it was met with overwhelming acclaim. Critics praised its authenticity and emotional depth, and sales skyrocketed. For the first time, Tyler felt like he was truly sharing a piece of himself with the world. Despite his achievements, Tyler couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. One day, he received a call from Jamie, who had remained a close friend and mentor. "Have you thought about reconnecting with your dad?" Jamie asked gently. Tyler hesitated. "He made his choice, Jamie. He didn't want me then, so why would he want me now?" "People change," Jamie replied. "And maybe he regrets what happened. You'll never know unless you try." The conversation lingered in Tyler's mind for days. Part of him longed to reach out, but fear held him back. What if Robert hadn't changed? What if the pain of rejection resurfaced all over again? Tyler's growing success only amplified these questions. As his brand became a global sensation, he found himself in the spotlight, celebrated for his resilience and creativity. But every time he was asked about his family, he dodged the question, unwilling to confront the truth. One evening, as he prepared for a high-profile awards ceremony, Tyler received a message from an old neighbor. It was brief but life-altering. "I thought you should know, your dad's been struggling. He lost the house and hasn't been doing well." The news hit Tyler like a freight train. He had spent years trying to bury his feelings for Robert, but they came rushing back with full force. Anger, sadness, and an inexplicable sense of responsibility swirled within him. For the first time in years, Tyler found himself wondering, was it time to face his past? Robert sat alone in the dim light of a small, run-down apartment, staring at the stack of overdue bills on the table. The once proud man who had built a life of discipline and order now found himself surrounded by chaos. His military pension barely covered the essentials, and after losing the family home to a series of bad investments, he had been forced to downsize to this cramped, lifeless space. The echoes of his past mistakes haunted him, but none more than the night he had forced Tyler out of their home. He tried to convince himself it had been the right decision, a matter of principle, but deep down, the guilt festered. Every now and then, he would pull out an old family photo, his fingers lingering on Tyler's youthful face, and wonder what had become of him. His financial troubles began after Ann's passing 3 years earlier. Without her to temper his impulsive decisions, Robert had poured their savings into a friend's startup that promised high returns. The business failed within months, leaving Robert with nothing. One by one, his remaining assets slipped through his fingers, until all that was left was his pride, and even that was wearing thin. Robert's days blurred into a monotonous routine of searching for odd jobs and scraping together enough money for food. The man who had once commanded respect now avoided the mirrors, unable to face the shadow of himself that stared back. One rainy afternoon, Robert decided to visit a thrift store to sell a few belongings. Among the items was an old coat Tyler had left behind the night he was forced to leave. As he held the coat in his hands, the memories came rushing back. He remembered Tyler wearing it on chilly mornings as he sketched in his notebook, his eyes lighting up with excitement over a new idea. The shopkeeper eyed the coat and offered a meager price. Robert hesitated, feeling a pang of guilt as he handed it over. "This is just junk," he muttered, trying to convince himself it didn't matter. But it did. Later that evening, Robert sat in his apartment, nursing a cheap cup of instant coffee. He thought about how proud Ann had been of Tyler's talent, always encouraging him to follow his dreams. "He's special, Robert," she used to say. "One day, you'll see it too." Robert had dismissed her words back then, but now they rang in his ears like an accusation. What if she had been right? What if he had been too blind, too stubborn, to see it? A few days later, as he walked through the neighborhood, Robert noticed a crowd gathered around a large digital billboard outside a department store. Curious, he approached, pushing his way to the front. The screen displayed a fashion show, models strutting down a runway in stunning designs. But what caught Robert's attention wasn't the clothes, it was the name displayed at the bottom of the screen, Tyler Sullivan. Robert's heart stopped. It couldn't be. He watched as the camera panned to the audience, showing Tyler standing among a sea of applause, smiling and waving. His son looked older, more confident, but there was no mistaking him. For a moment, Robert felt a flicker of pride, but it was quickly extinguished by shame. Tyler had achieved so much without him, despite him. That night, Robert returned to his apartment and pulled out a box of old photographs. Flipping through them, he stopped at a picture of Tyler as a child, holding up a crudely sewn dress he had made from scraps. His smile had been so wide, so full of hope. Robert placed the photo on the table and sat silently, his head in his hands. He couldn't ignore the truth any longer, he had failed his son. And now, it seemed, Tyler didn't need him anymore. As Robert drifted off to sleep, he thought about reaching out to Tyler. But how could he? What could he possibly say to a son he had abandoned? For the first time in years, Robert prayed, not for himself, but for Tyler. He prayed that wherever his son was, he was happy. And he prayed for the courage to face the mistakes he had made, no matter how painful it might be. Tyler sat in his studio, surrounded by bolts of fabric and half-finished sketches, but his mind was elsewhere. The message from his old neighbor about his father's decline echoed in his thoughts. He hadn't spoken to Robert since the night he was kicked out, and the idea of confronting him stirred a storm of emotions, anger, sadness, and an aching sense of unresolved pain. "Maybe it's time," Jamie said softly over the phone. "You've built this incredible life, Tyler. Facing him doesn't mean forgiving him right away, but it might give you the closure you need." Tyler sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Jamie. What if he hasn't changed? And what if he has?" Jamie countered. "You won't know until you try." After days of contemplation, Tyler made a decision. If he was going to see his father, he needed to control the setting. he arranged for an invitation to be sent anonymously to Robert, asking him to attend a private dinner at a luxurious restaurant. Tyler planned the event meticulously, ensuring every detail was perfect. The evening of the dinner arrived, and Tyler waited anxiously in the private dining room. He wore a tailored suit from his latest collection, a subtle symbol of how far he had come. As the clock ticked closer to the appointed time, he began to doubt himself. Would Robert even show up? At exactly 7 o'clock, the door opened, and Robert stepped in, looking hesitant and out of place. His clothes were worn but clean, and he carried himself with the same rigid posture Tyler remembered. "Mr. Sullivan?" a waiter asked, guiding Robert to the table. Robert looked around, confused. "Who invited me here?" Tyler stood, his heart pounding. "I did." Robert's eyes widened as he took in the sight of his son. Tyler looked confident, successful, a far cry from the boy he had last seen standing in the doorway with tears in his eyes. "Tyler," Robert said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Have a seat," Tyler said, gesturing to the chair across from him. The silence between them was palpable as they sat down. Tyler broke it first. "I heard about what's been happening. About Mom, the house, everything." Robert looked down at his hands. "I didn't know you knew." He stopped, swallowing hard. "How have you been?" "How have I been?" Tyler repeated, his tone sharp. "I've been trying to rebuild my life since the night you threw me out." "How do you think I've been?" Robert flinched at the words, but Tyler continued. "Do you know what it's like to sleep on a park bench? To wonder if you'll even survive the next day? I had no one, Dad. No family, no home. And you didn't care." "I did care," Robert said quietly, his voice trembling. "I just didn't know how to show it." Tyler laughed bitterly. "You cared? That's funny, because it didn't feel like it." The conversation hung in the air, raw and unfiltered. Tyler's emotions spilled out, years of anger and hurt finally finding a voice. Robert listened, his shoulders slumping under the weight of each word. "I was wrong," Robert admitted after a long silence. "I was so wrong, Tyler. I thought I was protecting you, but all I did was push you away. And I can never take that back." "Why now?" Tyler asked, his voice softer but still guarded. "Why are you admitting this now?" "Because I've lost everything," Robert said, tears welling in his eyes. "Your mother's gone. The house is gone. And the only thing that matters, my family, I threw away. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Tyler, but I need you to know that I regret everything I did to you." The vulnerability in Robert's voice caught Tyler off guard. For the first time, he saw not the authoritarian figure who had dominated his childhood, but a broken man consumed by regret. "I don't know if I can forgive you," Tyler said honestly. "Not yet. But I don't want to hate you anymore. It's exhausting." Robert nodded, his tears spilling over. "I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. I just want a chance to know you again." Tyler studied his father's face, searching for sincerity. He saw it in the way Robert's hands shook, in the way his voice cracked with emotion. The waiter interrupted with the main course, and the two men shared a quiet, reflective meal. The silence was no longer hostile, it was contemplative, as if both were trying to process the fragile bridge they had begun to rebuild. As they finished their meal, Tyler spoke again. "I'm not promising that things will go back to the way they were. But maybe we can start over, slowly." Robert nodded, his expression a mixture of relief and hope. "I'd like that. More than anything." When the dinner ended, Tyler offered to drive Robert home. As they pulled up to the small, run-down apartment building, Tyler hesitated. "This isn't much," Robert said, his voice filled with shame. "It's not about where you live," Tyler replied. "It's about what you do with the time you have left." Robert smiled faintly, and for the first time, Tyler saw a glimmer of the father he had once admired. That night, as Tyler drove back to his apartment, he felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, sadness, and the faintest hint of hope. The journey to reconciliation would be long, but for the first time, it felt possible. The days following the dinner were tentative yet meaningful. Tyler and Robert began to communicate more frequently, though their conversations were careful, almost delicate. Each word exchanged felt like laying a brick on the fragile foundation of their newfound connection. Tyler wasn't ready to fully trust his father, but there was something cathartic in hearing Robert admit his mistakes and express a genuine desire to change. One Saturday morning, Tyler arrived at Robert's apartment unannounced. He stood outside the door, holding a bag of groceries and a coffee in each hand. When Robert opened the door, his eyes widened in surprise. "Tyler," he said, his voice tinged with both joy and uncertainty. "I wasn't expecting you." "I figured you could use some real food," Tyler said, stepping inside. The apartment was as sparse and tired as he remembered, but it was clean and orderly, a remnant of Robert's military discipline. As Tyler began unpacking the groceries, Robert sat at the small kitchen table, watching him. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. "I know," Tyler replied without looking up. "But I wanted to." They spent the afternoon cooking together, something they hadn't done since Tyler was a child. Robert tried to keep the conversation light, asking Tyler about his work and upcoming projects. It felt awkward at first, but gradually, they found a rhythm. "Your mom would be so proud of you," Robert said suddenly, his voice soft. Tyler paused, setting down the knife he was using to chop vegetables. "She always believed in me," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Even when you didn't." Robert winced at the remark but nodded. "I know. And I regret that more than anything." Tyler sighed, leaning against the counter. "I don't want to keep rehashing the past, Dad. If we're going to try to move forward, we need to focus on now." Robert looked up at him, his expression earnest. "You're right. I want to be better for you, Tyler. I don't want to waste the time we have left." Over the next few months, their relationship continued to grow. Tyler introduced Robert to his world, inviting him to a small showcase of his latest collection. Robert arrived wearing a suit Tyler had designed, and although he looked slightly uncomfortable in the stylish outfit, his pride was evident. As Tyler spoke on stage about the inspiration behind his designs, Robert sat in the audience, wiping away tears. He had spent years dismissing Tyler's talent, but now, seeing the admiration and respect his son commanded, he realized how wrong he had been. The turning point came when Robert approached Tyler with an idea. "I want to do something to give back," Robert said one afternoon as they sat in a park. "I've been thinking about all the other parents who might have made the same mistakes I did. I want to help them understand what they're risking if they don't accept their kids." Tyler was taken aback. "You'd really want to do that?" Robert nodded. "I can't undo the past, but maybe I can prevent someone else from making the same mistakes. It's the least I can do." Together, they began planning workshops for parents in the community. Tyler used his platform and connections to promote the initiative, while Robert brought his unique perspective as a father who had learned the hard way. Their first session was small, attended by only a handful of parents, but it was deeply impactful. One mother approached Robert after the session, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said. "I've been struggling to understand my son, but hearing your story, it helped me see things differently." Robert's eyes welled with tears as he shook her hand. "If I can help even one parent, then this is all worth it." As their project gained momentum, Tyler found himself feeling something he hadn't felt in years: pride in his father. The man who had once been a source of so much pain was now working tirelessly to make amends, not just to Tyler but to others as well. One evening, after a particularly successful workshop, Tyler and Robert sat on a bench overlooking the city. "You've come a long way," Tyler said, glancing at his father. "So have you," Robert replied with a small smile. "And I couldn't be prouder." Tyler's chest tightened at the words. He had spent years longing to hear them, and now that he finally had, they felt like a balm to his soul. That night, Tyler returned home and opened the box of old photographs he had kept hidden away. As he flipped through the pictures, he found one of himself as a boy, sitting on Robert's shoulders, both of them laughing. He placed the photo on his desk, a reminder of how far they had come. Reconciliation wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. For the first time, Tyler felt that the weight he had carried for so long was beginning to lift. The project that Tyler and Robert started began to take on a life of its own. What had initially been a small, local workshop soon evolved into a full-fledged initiative. They called it Bridges, a program aimed at fostering understanding and acceptance between parents and LGBTQ+ children. The workshops were hosted in community centers, schools, and churches, reaching families who needed the message the most. Tyler's growing platform amplified the program's visibility. He spoke about it in interviews, posted heartfelt stories on social media, and even included a section about bridges in one of his fashion shows. The response was overwhelming, with messages pouring in from parents, children, and allies expressing their gratitude. Robert was a reluctant star of the program. Though he preferred to work behind the scenes, his story became the centerpiece of many sessions. Standing in front of a room filled with parents, he would recount his journey, the mistakes he had made, the pain he had caused, and the steps he had taken to rebuild his relationship with Tyler. One afternoon, after a particularly emotional session, a young man approached Robert. His eyes were red from crying, but his expression was determined. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, "I wish my dad could hear what you just said. Maybe then he'd understand what I've been going through." Robert placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "Don't give up on him," he said gently. "Sometimes it takes people longer to realize what really matters. But if I could change, so can he." As Bridges grew, so did Tyler's career. His latest collection, aptly titled Forged Bonds, was a celebration of resilience and reconciliation. Each piece told a story, blending harsh lines with soft textures to symbolize the interplay of pain and healing. The collection debuted at a prestigious international fashion show, drawing rave reviews. Tyler stood backstage as the final model walked the runway, his heart swelling with pride. But what mattered most to him wasn't the applause or the accolades, it was seeing Robert sitting in the front row, clapping harder than anyone else. After the show, Tyler and Robert shared a quiet moment together in the green room. "You've outdone yourself, son," Robert said, his voice filled with emotion. "Thanks, Dad," Tyler replied, smiling. "It means a lot to hear you say that." They sat in silence for a moment, savoring the peace that had taken years to find. The culmination of their journey came during a gala benefiting LGBTQ+ youth, where Tyler was being honored for his contributions to the community. The event was lavish, with glittering chandeliers and tables adorned with elegant centerpieces. Tyler had invited Robert as his guest of honor, and though Robert was nervous about being in the spotlight, he agreed to attend. During the ceremony, Tyler took the stage to accept his award. His speech was heartfelt and personal, reflecting on the challenges he had faced and the people who had helped him along the way. "But tonight," Tyler said, his voice steady, "I want to share this moment with someone who's taught me that change is possible, even when it feels out of reach. Someone who's shown me that love can find its way back, even after years of pain. Dad, would you join me up here?" The room erupted in applause as Robert stood, his face a mixture of surprise and emotion. Slowly, he made his way to the stage, where Tyler extended a hand to help him up. Robert stood beside Tyler, looking out at the sea of faces. He cleared his throat, his hands trembling slightly as he held the microphone. "I never thought I'd be standing here," he began. "For a long time, I thought being a good father meant controlling every aspect of my child's life. I thought I was protecting Tyler by pushing him to fit into my idea of what a son should be. But I was wrong. So wrong." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "I almost lost the most incredible person I've ever known because I let my fear and ignorance blind me. But Tyler, he gave me a second chance. He showed me that love is bigger than our differences, bigger than our mistakes. And for that, I'll be forever grateful." The audience gave a standing ovation as Robert handed the microphone back to Tyler, who hugged him tightly. It was a moment neither of them would ever forget. As the gala wound down, Tyler and Robert mingled with attendees, receiving countless words of gratitude and encouragement. Parents shared stories of how bridges had helped them reconnect with their children, and young people expressed how much Tyler's work had inspired them. Late that night, as they left the venue, Robert turned to Tyler. "You've changed so many lives," he said. "Including mine." Tyler smiled. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad." In the weeks that followed, their bond only grew stronger. They continued working on bridges, expanding its reach to more cities and communities. Tyler also found ways to integrate his father's story into his fashion brand, creating a special campaign that highlighted the importance of acceptance and understanding. One evening, as Tyler prepared for another fashion show, he found an old photo of himself and Robert in the attic of his studio. In it, they were laughing together, carefree and happy. He framed the photo and placed it on his desk, a reminder of how far they had come. The story of Tyler and Robert was not just one of reconciliation, it was a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and the human capacity for change. Their journey inspired countless others to mend their own broken bonds, proving that even the deepest wounds could heal with time, effort, and understanding. And though their past would always be a part of them, it no longer defined them. Together, they looked to the future, determined to build a legacy of love and acceptance for generations to come.